Before we begin this incredible story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss stories that touch the heart and inspire the soul. The morning sun cast long shadows across the naval base in San Diego. Margaret Chen stood at the edge of the parking lot, clutching a worn leather bag that had seen better days. She was 72 years old, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and hands that trembled slightly from age. She wore a plain floral dress and comfortable shoes, nothing that would make her stand out among the crisp uniforms and polished boots that surrounded her. Margaret had received a letter 3 weeks ago. It was formal, typed on official Navy station head, inviting her to attend a ceremony at the base. She almost threw it away, thinking it was a mistake. After all, she had never served in the military. Her late husband James had been a Navy cook. Nothing glamorous. Nothing that would warrant any special recognition. Decades after his passing, but something made her keep the letter, and something stronger made her come today. As she walked toward the main gate, young sailors rushed past her, barely noticing the elderly woman moving slowly against the flow of military precision. She felt small here, out of place, like a sparrow that had wandered into an eagle's nest. The guard at the gate checked her identification twice, his young face showing confusion at her civilian status. He made a phone call, waited, then waved her through with a nod that held no warmth. Margaret followed the direction she had been given, her feet aching with each step. The base was enormous, a maze of identical buildings and endless concrete. She passed training grounds where young men and women pushed, their bodies to the limit, their shouts and grunts filling the air. She passed offices where decisions were made that would send people to the far corners of the world. And she felt invisible, a ghost drifting through a world that had no use for old women in floral dresses. She was lost. The building numbers made no sense, and every corner looked the same. Margaret stopped, leaning against a wall to catch her breath. Her chest felt tight, and for a moment she wondered if coming here had been a terrible mistake. Maybe the letter really was an error. Maybe she should just go home to her quiet apartment, where she understood the rules, where she knew her place. Just as Margaret was about to turn back, she heard footsteps. Heavy, purposeful footsteps that echoed with authority. She looked up and saw a man approaching. He was tall, perhaps in his early 40s, with a build that spoke of countless hours of brutal training. His uniform was different from the others she had seen, darker, with insignia she did not recognize. His face was weathered, marked with small scars that told stories he would never speak aloud. His eyes were sharp, the kind that missed nothing. Commander David Patterson had been having a rough morning. He had just come from a briefing about an upcoming mission that would take his team into dangerous territory. He had lost a man 6 months ago, and the weight of that loss still sat heavy on his shoulders. He was thinking about equipment lists and exit strategies when he nearly walked past the old woman leaning against the wall. Nearly, but not quite. Something made him stop. Perhaps it was the way she held herself, small, but not defeated. Perhaps it was the leather bag she clutched, which he recognized as military issue from decades past. Or perhaps it was something in her eyes, a depth that he had seen before in the faces of people who had survived things that would break others. He stopped walking and turned to face her. Margaret looked up at this imposing figure and felt a flutter of nervousness. She was not supposed to be here, she thought. She was in the way. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice barely carrying over the distant sounds of training. "I am looking for Building 7. I think I am lost." Commander Patterson studied her for a moment. He could have simply pointed her in the right direction. He had a dozen urgent matters demanding his attention, but something held him there. And years of trusting his instincts in life or death situations had taught him to pay attention when something felt important. "Building 7 is back that way, ma'am," he said, his voice respectful. "But that is quite a walk. May I ask what brings you here today?" Margaret hesitated. She felt foolish suddenly, like she was wasting this important man's time. But there was something in his face, despite its hardness, that felt safe. "I received a letter," she said, opening her bag with shaking hands. "I was invited to some ceremony, but I think perhaps there was a mistake. I was never in the Navy. My husband was, but he passed away 18 years ago." The commander took the letter she offered and read it carefully. His expression did not change, but Margaret noticed his grip on the paper tightened slightly. He read it twice, then looked at her with new eyes. "Mrs. Chen?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she replied. Confused by the change in his tone, what happened next would puzzle Margaret for the rest of her life. Commander David Patterson stood perfectly still for 3 long seconds, his eyes fixed on the elderly woman before him. Then, in emotion so swift and precise it seemed rehearsed, he came to attention. His spine straightened, his shoulders pulled back, and his hand rose in a salute so crisp it could have been painted. But this was not the casual acknowledgement one service member might give another. This was something else entirely. This was a salute given with reverence, with weight, with meaning that transcended rank and protocol. Margaret stared in shock. She had seen her husband salute countless times, but no one had ever saluted her. She was a civilian, just an old woman. This made no sense. "Sir, I think you are confused," she stammered. "I am not military." "You do not need to, with respect, ma'am," the commander interrupted gently, his hand still raised. "I know exactly who you are." He held the salute for a moment longer, then lowered his hand slowly. His hard features had softened, and there was something in his eyes that looked almost like emotion. Though Margaret suspected this man rarely allowed himself such things. "Mrs. Chen, it would be my honor to escort you to Building 7 myself." Before Margaret could protest, the commander had taken her worn leather bag and offered her his arm. She took it, more confused than ever, and they began walking. But they did not walk quickly. The commander matched his pace to hers, slowing his powerful stride to accommodate her shuffling steps. Other military personnel passed them, and Margaret noticed how they stared. A SEAL commander, clearly someone important, escorting an elderly civilian woman through the base like she was visiting royalty. As they walked, the commander spoke. "Mrs. Chen, do you know why you were invited here today?" She shook her head. "The Navy has spent the last 2 years compiling records, tracking down stories that were never properly documented. Your name came up in multiple accounts. Very specific accounts." "Do not understand," Margaret said. "I worked in a laundromat. I did alterations and repairs. That is all." The commander's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, with your permission, I would like to tell you a story. It is about a young sailor named Marcus Webb. He was 23 years old, fresh out of basic training, assigned to a destroyer that was about to deploy. This was back in 1987. He was scared, far from home, and he had torn his dress uniform the night before inspection. The tear was bad right across the chest, and he knew he would be disciplined. He had no money to buy a new one, and no idea how to fix it." Margaret listened, her brow furrowed. The year meant something to her, but the name did not. Marcus was walking through town, desperate, when he found a small laundromat. The woman inside was young then, maybe in her 30s. She saw this scared kid and asked what was wrong. He showed her the uniform, and she took it without hesitation. She worked on it for 3 hours, right there while he waited. She repaired it so perfectly that you could not even tell it had been damaged. And when he asked how much he owed her, she refused payment. She just said that her husband served, and she knew how hard it was. The commander paused, and Margaret's eyes widened with recognition. The memory came flooding back to Margaret like a dam breaking. She remembered that young man, tall and skinny with frightened eyes. She remembered how his hands had shaken when he showed her the torn uniform. How his voice had cracked when he explained that his mother had saved for months to see him off properly. She remembered staying late that evening, missing dinner with James to make sure every stitch was perfect. "I remember him," Margaret whispered. "He was so young, so scared." Commander Patterson nodded. Marcus Webb went on to serve for 20 years. He became a chief petty officer, trained hundreds of sailors, and saved lives during a shipboard fire in the Gulf. He retired with honors. And every single year, on the anniversary of his graduation from basic training, he sent a letter to the Navy Department of Records. In every letter, he told the story of the woman in the laundromat who saved his career before it even started. He tried to find you, to thank you properly, but you had moved. The laundromat closed down. Great felt tears prickling her eyes. She had never thought about that young man again. Not really. It had seemed like such a small thing at the time, but the commander was not finished. Marcus was just one Mrs. Chen. The researchers found 17 documented cases, 17 sailors over a span of 25 years, who wrote about a woman in a laundromat near the San Diego base. A woman who fixed their uniforms, sometimes their personal clothes, often for free or for whatever change they could spare. A woman who fed them when they looked hungry. A woman who listened when they needed to talk. A woman whose small acts of kindness had enormous impacts on young lives far from home. They had reached Building 7, but the commander made no move to enter. He stood there, this hardened warrior who had seen combat in multiple theaters, and looked at this elderly woman with something approaching awe. He became an admiral. Another was Patricia Hernandez, who designed improvements to carrier safety systems that have saved countless lives. Another was James J.J. Thompson, who threw himself on a grenade in Fallujah and saved his entire squad. He received the Medal of Honor posthumously. His family still has the letter he wrote home 2 weeks before he died, talking about the kind lady at the laundromat who taught him that service meant helping people even when you would get nothing in return. Margaret's legs felt weak. The commander gently guided her to a bench near the building's entrance. She sat down heavily, her mind reeling. She had just been trying to help. They were so young, those boys and girls in their uniforms. She had thought of them as she thought of her own children, the ones she had never been able to have. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her voice breaking. The commander knelt down so he was at eye level with her. This powerful man, who commanded elite warriors, knelt before an elderly woman in a floral dress. "Because you need to understand something, Mrs. Chen. Military service comes in many forms. You never wore a uniform. You never took an oath. But for 25 years, you served the Navy and the people in it just as surely as anyone who did." Inside Building 7, Margaret discovered that the ceremony was not what she had imagined. The room was small, intimate, filled with perhaps 30 people. Most were in uniform, but there were civilians too. As Margaret entered on Commander Patterson's arm, every person in the room stood. Some saluted, others simply placed their hands over their hearts. An older man with admiral's stars on his shoulders approached her with a warm smile. "Mrs. Chen, I am Admiral Robert Kowalski. I do not know if you remember me, but in 1989, I was a very homesick ensign who stumbled into your laundromat with a duffel bag full of clothes I had no idea how to wash. You spent 2 hours teaching me how to properly care for my uniforms. You refused payment. You gave me tea and cookies and listened to me talk about my family. You told me that being far from home was hard, but that I was doing something important." Margaret stared at this distinguished officer, trying to see the young man in his weathered face, and then she saw it, the eyes, the same uncertain eyes that had looked at her over a sorting table decades ago. "I remember," she whispered. "You were worried about your mother. She was sick." The Admiral's composure cracked slightly. "She recovered. I got emergency leave 2 weeks later and made it home in time. I always believed it was because you told me to call the Red Cross, to not be afraid to ask for help. You gave me permission to be human while being a sailor." One by one, others came forward. A retired chief petty officer who Margaret had given bus fare to when he was broke and stranded. A female lieutenant commander who had been a young recruit struggling with whether she belonged in the Navy until Margaret had told her that strength came in many forms. A civilian contractor who had been that contractor's father. A sailor Margaret had helped practice for his citizenship test. They told stories Margaret had forgotten. Moments that had seemed insignificant to her, but had changed trajectories of lives. The young woman who had been contemplating going AWOL until Margaret had talked her through her homesickness. The sailor who had been injured and depressed until Margaret had visited him in the hospital, bringing homemade soup and treating him like family. The recruit who had been bullied and had found sanctuary in Margaret's laundromat, where she had taught him that kindness was not weakness. Commander Patterson stood to the side, watching. He had not told Margaret his own story yet. He had been 12 years old, not a sailor, when his father had been stationed at the San Diego base. His parents had been going through a bitter divorce, and young David had been angry at the world. He had wandered into the laundromat one day, planning to steal something just to feel some sense of control. Margaret had caught him, but instead of calling the police, she had sat him down and given him a job. For 6 months, he had swept floors and folded clothes after school. She had paid him fairly, treated him with respect, and never once mentioned the attempted theft. She had seen through his anger to the hurt underneath. That job, the kindness from a stranger, had given him structure when his world was chaos. It had taught him that second chances mattered. When he had joined the Navy at 18, it had been because he wanted to be the kind of person who helped others the way Margaret Chen had helped him. He had never forgotten her, though he had lost track of her when his family moved away. Admiral Kowalski called the room to attention. From a wooden box, he removed a medal. It was not a standard military decoration, but something special, created specifically for this occasion. The Navy Meritorious Public Service Award, the highest recognition the Navy could give to a civilian. Margaret Chen, the Admiral said formally, for 25 years of dedicated, selfless service to United States Navy personnel, for countless acts of kindness that strengthened morale. Resolve in the human spirit of those who serve. It is my profound honor to present you with this award. Your service, though unofficial, has had ripples that spread farther than you will ever know. You made sailors better. You made people better. You made the Navy better. Margaret stood with the commander's help as the Admiral placed the medal around her neck. The room erupted in applause. Hardened warriors, some who had faced death in combat, applauded this small, elderly woman with genuine emotion. Many had tears in their eyes, but the ceremony was not quite over. The Admiral raised his hand for silence. There is one more thing, Mrs. Chen. We located Marcus Webb, the first sailor whose letter began this investigation. He wanted very much to be here today, but he is battling cancer and could not travel. However, he sent something for you. A video screen lit up, showing an elderly black man in a hospital bed. He was thin, clearly ill, but his eyes were bright. Mrs. Chen, his recorded voice said, "You do not know me, but you saved my life. Not dramatically, not by pulling me from fire or danger, but by showing a terrified kid that there were good people in the world who cared. I built my entire career on the principle you taught me that day, that we take care of each other. I taught it to every sailor who served under me. Some of them taught it to others. Your kindness multiplied again and again, spreading to people you never met in places you have never been. I want you to know that as I face my final days, one of my brightest memories is of you threading a needle under a lamp. Taking time you did not have to help someone you did not know. Thank you does not cover it, but thank you. Thank you for your service." The screen went dark. There was not a dry eye in the room. Commander Patterson stepped forward one final time. He stood before Margaret, this woman who had no idea she had helped set him on the path that led to becoming a SEAL commander. "Mrs. Chen," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "I was the angry kid who tried to steal from you in 1991. You gave me a job instead of a police record. You gave me dignity when I deserved punishment. Everything I am, every life I have saved, every sailor I have trained, stands on the foundation you built. So when I saluted you earlier, it was not out of obligation or protocol. It was respect. Pure respect." Margaret looked up at this powerful man and finally understood. Her small acts had not been small at all. They had been seeds planted in fertile ground, growing into forests she had never seen. She had served, truly served, in her own way. As the ceremony ended and people lined up to thank her personally, shake her hand, or simply stand near someone who had reminded them why they served, Margaret felt something she had not felt in many years. She felt that her life had mattered. Not in grand headline-making ways, but in the quiet, essential way that holds the world together, one kind act at a time. Commander Patterson escorted her back to her car as the sun began to set. Before she drove away, he saluted her one final time. She returned it awkwardly, not knowing the proper form, and he smiled. "Perfect, ma'am," he said. "Absolutely perfect." Margaret drove home that evening with a medal around her neck and a lifetime of meaning restored to her heart. She had been invisible, she had thought. But she had been wrong. She had been seen, remembered, and honored by those who mattered most, the people she had helped without expecting anything in return. That night, in her small apartment, Margaret Chen slept peacefully, knowing that service has no rank, requires no uniform, and lives forever in the hearts it touches. The story of the woman in the laundromat spread through the Navy, told and retold, a reminder that heroes come in all forms. And sometimes the most important battles are won not with weapons, but with kindness, one person at a time.